Learning from the Stranger, a book by David Smith. Chapter 3 is entitled Cage, Carnival, or Calling. This video is an overview of Chapter 3, and there are 3 points that I'd like to highlight. So let's get started. Point 1, Cage. We are born and raised in culture that we don't choose. It's actually assigned to us. So even before we are born, we are introduced and developed into cultures. So do the cultures in which we are ascribed to or identify with prevent us from thriving in society? If the answer is yes, then we need to be asking ourselves why. Not only why, but what can we do to change it? Smith actually asks a very similar question when he talks about cultural patterns. He asks if they are gifts from God or cages that rob us of our freedoms. I think he asks the question to get the reader to consider their own cultural identity and the cultural identity of others. So when it comes to culture and cultural differences, do they or can they create cages that rob us of our freedoms? Yes, they can if we allow them. So let's move on to point 2, Carnival. How we behave, communicate, interact with others is actually connected to our culture. The environment in which we are reared in reinforces the culture in which we thrive. It's reflected in just about everything that we do. Smith proclaims that culture is a gift from God, and gratitude towards culture and cultural differences actually honors God. He goes on to share that being proud of our culture does not mean that pride should follow. Pride actually invites superiority, and there's no room for that. Gratitude and repentance actually gives balance to views of our own culture as well as cultures that are different than ours. What does this mean for our leaders? This question actually brings us to our last point, which is calling. Our calling. We are made in the image of God. Having God's image means that we are given certain responsibilities that are inherent to our human condition. We must not become complacent. Our calling does not allow us to be complacent, which means there's always room for growth and development. We must strive to embrace and celebrate culture just as we embrace and celebrate life itself. Our calling as leaders requires us, or should require us, to examine culture in its fallen state, and recognize that there is need for growth and development. Collectively, cage, carnival, and calling relate to culture. And I like to think that it relates to cultural competence. Now, there was a study conducted by Donna Mason and Jean Leslie, and they conclude that knowledge of cultural differences actually enhances cultural competence. Organizations that have leaders with high cultural competence seem to invite diversity, and such invitation creates an increase in innovation and creativity in our workplaces. So as HR and organizational leaders, we hold the key to establishing and developing organizational cultures that invite and celebrate cultural differences. We need to recognize and realize that all cultures are a gift from God. And this concludes my overview of Chapter 3. Thank you.